All right, we're back with chapter 23, the ebb tide runs. Remember what we talked about last time. The ebb tide is when the water recedes back, the ocean pulls back from the beach. Okay, that'll be important to what we're about to learn. Okay, so, and we're going to be talking about the Coracle. He's in this boat that Ben Gunn made, and I drew a picture, kind of a rough picture that you can see here. All right, so there we go. This would be it when it's like lying on the ground from a side view. It kind of like a scoop or a cup laying down, like a spoon, the body of a spoon. And what it is like a frame made out of wood and then hide stretched over it. So like this, you could almost use it like a little tent. You could get under it like a turtle shell, right? And then you flip it over and it's got the wood, the pieces of wood, the branches that it's made out of, like that. But then there's this piece, of the black piece right there is called a thwart. And it's basically the bench in the middle that also keeps it spread out and wide there. So you've got like a, more of a boat shape. And that the blue then would be the outer hide that you're seeing. And that's the interior right there. And just like a little paddle to push it along with. It's a pretty small thing too. Like this just fits Jim. It isn't much bigger than Jim or a small person might be able to use. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the chapter. Now, as we're going, one of your tips that you could do is you could mark the text as you go. If you haven't been already doing that, it's really, really important. Saves you a lot of time. So as you are looking for words that you're going to define later, you circle them, underline them, whatever works best for you. And when you see things that you don't understand or you get a little stuck, I'm reading along and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Put a question mark in that paragraph for going back to. And if I don't cover it in our discussion afterward, then that'd be a good thing to come and talk to me on a Zoom meeting about or send me an email and get it to be clarified, because you don't want to have a misunderstanding that changes how you understand the whole story. Okay, so here we go. The Coracle, as I had ample reason to know before I was done with her, was a very safe boat for a person of my height and weight, both buoyant and clever in a seaway, but she was the most cross-grained, lopsided craft to manage. Do as you pleased, she always made more leeway than anything else, and turning round and round was the maneuver she was best at. Even Ben Gunn himself has admitted that she was queer to handle till you knew her way. So what he's saying is it floats really well, but it handles really badly. And mostly it just wanted to turn in circles when he was trying to get it to go somewhere. Certainly I did not know her way. She turned in every direction but the one I was bound to go. The most part of the time we were broadside on, and I'm very sure I never should have made the ship at all but for the tide. By good fortune, paddle as I pleased, the tide was still sweeping me down, and there lay the Hispaniola, right in the fairway, hardly to be missed. First she loomed before me like a blot of something yet blacker than darkness. Then her spars and hull began to take shape, and the next moment, as it seemed, for the farther I went, the brisker grew the current of the ebb, I was alongside of her hawser, and it laid hold. Hawser is the line that goes to the anchor, a very, very big rope, very tough, giant piece of rope, okay? First she loomed before me like, oh, I'm sorry, moving back down. The hawser, there we go. The hawser was as taut as a bowstring, and the current so strong she pulled upon her anchor. All round the hull, in the blackness, the rippling current bubbled and chattered like a little mountain stream. One cut with my sea gully, and the Hispaniola would go humming down the tide. So this is what he's saying. He gets up to the anchor rope, and that's all that's holding the Hispaniola in the tide. The tide is pulling so strongly. The ocean has such power in the tide that all he would have to do is cut that, and the Hispaniola would just go right out to sea. So far, so good. But it next occurred to my recollection that a taut hawser, suddenly cut, is a thing as dangerous as a kicking horse. 10 to 1, if I were so foolhardy as to cut the Hispaniola from her anchor, I and the Coracle would be knocked clean out of the water. Okay, so he's right. Cutting a taut rope can be dangerous because it can snap back. A really big one with that much weight behind it could really take you out, could really hurt him. Right? And definitely can knock him in the boat out of the water, for sure, okay? This brought me to a full stop, and if fortune had not gained, again, particularly favored me, I should have had to abandon my design. For the light airs, which had begun blowing from the southeast and the south, had hauled round after nightfall into the southwest. Just while I was meditating, a puff came, caught the Hispaniola, and forced her up into the current, and to my great joy, I felt the hawser slacken in my grasp, and the hand by which I held it dip for a second under the water. Okay, so the wind just moved the boat up enough that the hawser, the rope, slackened. With that, I made my mind up, took out my gully, that's a knife, right? Opened it with my teeth and cut one strand after another till the vessel swung by only two. Then I lay quiet, waiting to sever these last when the strain should be once more lightened by a breath of wind. Okay, so he gets it down to the last two strands of the rope and he's just waiting for it to slacken enough that he won't get snapped by it when he cuts it. All this time I had heard the sound of loud voices from the cabin, but to say truth, my mind had been so entirely taken up with other thoughts that I had scarcely given ear. Now, however, when I had nothing else to do, I began to pay more heed. One I recognized for the cozen's Israel Hands that had been Flint's gunner in former days. The other was, of course, my friend of the red nightcap. Both men were plainly the worse of drink, and they were still drinking, for even while I was listening, one of them, with a drunken cry, opened the stern window and threw out something which I divined to be an empty bottle. But they were not only tipsy, it was plain that they were furiously angry. Oaths flew like hailstones, and every now and then there came forth such an explosion as I thought was sure to end in blows. But each time the quarrel passed off, and the voices grumbled lower for a while, until the next crisis came in its turn, passed away without result. So the only two guys that are left on the Hispaniola, two of the pirates, have been drinking, and they're mad at each other. They're angry. Okay. All right. On shore, I could see the glow of the great campfire burning warmly through the shoreside trees. Someone was singing a dull old droning sailor's song with a droop and a quaver at the end of every verse, and seemingly no end to it at all but the patience of the singer. I had heard it on the voyage more than once and remembered these words: "But one man of a crew alive, what put to sea was 75. And I thought it was a ditty rather too dolefully appropriate for a company that had met such cruel losses in the morning. But indeed, from what I saw, all these buccaneers were as callous as the sea they sailed on. At last the breeze came. The schooner sidled and drew nearer in the dark. I felt the hawser slacken once more, and with a good, tough effort, cut the last fibers through. The breeze had but little action on the Coracle, and I was almost instantly swept against the bows of the Hispaniola. At the same time, the schooner began to turn upon her heel and spinning slowly end for end across the current. I wrought like a fiend, for I expected every moment to be swamped, and since I found I could not push the Coracle directly off, I now shoved straight astern. At length, I was clear of my dangerous neighbor, and just as I gave the last impulsion, my hands came across a light cord that was trailing overboard across the stern bulwarks. Instantly, I grasped it. Why I should have done so, I can hardly say. It was at first mere instinct, but once I had it in my hands and found it fast, curiosity began to get the upper hand, and I determined I should have one look through the cabin window. I pulled in hand over hand on the cord, and when I judged myself near enough, rose at infinite risk to about half my height, and thus commanded the roof and a slice of the interior cabin. By this time, the schooner and her little consort were gliding pretty swiftly through the water. Indeed, we had already fetched up level with the campfire. The ship was talking, as sailors say, loudly, treading the innumerable ripples with an incessant weltering splash, and until I got my eye above the windowsill, I could not comprehend why the watchman had taken no alarm. One glance, however, was sufficient, and it was only one glance that I durst take from that unsteady skiff. It showed me Hans and his companion locked together in deadly wrestle, each with his hand upon the other's throat. I dropped upon the thwart again. It's the bench in the boat. None too soon, for I was near overboard. I could see nothing for the moment but these two furious and crimson faces swaying together under the smoky lamp, and I shut my eyes to let them grow once more familiar with the darkness. The endless ballad had come to an end at last, and the whole diminished company about the campfire had broken into the chorus I had heard so often. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest. Yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. I was just thinking how busy drink and the devil were at that very moment at the cabin of the Hispaniola when I was surprised by a sudden lurch of the Coracle. At the same moment, she yawed sharply and seemed to change her course. The speed, in the meantime, had strangely increased. I opened my eyes at once. All round me were little ripples, combing over with a sharp, bristling sound and slightly phosphorescent. The Hispaniola herself, a few yards in whose wake I was still being whirled along, seemed to stagger in her course, and I saw her spars toss a little against the blackness of the night. Nay, as I looked longer, I made sure she was also wheeling to the southward. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart jumped against my ribs. There, right behind me, was the glow of the campfire. The current had turned at right angles, sweeping around along with the tall schooner and the little dancing coracle, ever quickening, ever bubbling higher, ever muttering louder. It went spinning through the narrows for the open sea. Suddenly, the schooner in front of me gave a violent yaw, turning, perhaps, through 20 degrees, and almost at the same moment, one shout followed another from on board. I could hear feet pounding on the companion ladder, and I knew that the two drunkards had at last been interrupted in their quarrel and awakened to a sense of their disaster. I lay down flat at the bottom of that wretched skiff and devoutly recommended my spirit to its maker. At the end of the straits, I made sure we must fall into some bar of raging breakers, where all my troubles would be ended speedily. And though I could perhaps bear to die, I could not bear to look upon my fate as it approached. So I must have lain for hours, continually beaten to and fro upon the billows, now and again wetted with flying sprays, and never ceasing to expect death at the next plunge. Gradually, weariness grew upon me, and numbness and occasional stupor fell upon my mind, even in the midst of my terrors, until sleep at last supervened, and my sea-tossed coracle. In my sea-tossed coracle I lay and dreamed of home in the old Admiral Benbow. All right. So in a nutshell, Jim took the little boat, went out into the anchorage, pulled up alongside, kind of accidentally got right next to the Hispaniola, cut the anchor line very cautiously, set the thing adrift, got caught in its wake, which means pulled along behind it because the Coracle is so light and bouncy and tiny, and the Hispaniola is so big and has so much draw, right? Pulled into its wake. The Hispaniola gets pulled out to sea, and so does Jim in his little boat. All right. There's a lot of other things that happen along the way, though, so let's back her up a little bit. Up in the beginning paragraphs, it tells us that a little bit about how the Hispaniola handles, and it's not great, but he's really lucky because the ebb tide is pulling out, and he gets pulled out directly into the path of the Hispaniola. And then when he gets there, he sees the Hawser, which is the line that goes to the anchor, and it's taut, and he has to wait for some wind to kind of push the Hispaniola so it slackens, and then he does cut partly the way through it, and then he's listening while he's waiting for it to go slack again, and he can hear the people up there have been drinking and they've been arguing. Okay, and so he waits again, and he also tells you a little bit about what's going on shore. The pirates on shore are also kind of partying, I guess you could say. He can tell they've been drinking, and they're singing, and they've got a big bonfire going, which means they're not being very careful right now, but I don't know. Is anybody? So he finally cuts through, sends it loose, and just before, he decides he's just going to look. So he kind of stands up in this little tipsy boat and pulls himself up on a rope so he can see what's going on. And he sees that the two men on board are fighting, wrestling and trying to strangle each other. They're so angry. And so they don't even notice when at first that boat is already moving and sloshing and making tons of noise. Really, it wasn't just sitting there anymore. And it starts heading out to sea, and they don't know it until it's too late. But also it's kind of too late for Jim, because Jim can't get that little coracle to go back to shore. He's stuck. So he just lays down. And the last paragraphs of this part of the story are actually kind of sad and scary. Jim is basically just thinking he's going to die. He says, I lay down flat in the bottom of that wretched skiff and devoutly recommended my spirit to its maker. He's basically praying, saying, take me, God, I'm done for, okay? He thought that he was going to actually hit the breakers, the big waves and everything would just crash him into the rocks, and that he would be dead immediately. And so he's just laying in the bottom of the boat, just thinking that every crash into the waves is going to be his last, and that he will die. And it must have been hours of that. and he finally fell asleep and dreamed of the Admiral Benbow, which, if you remember, is his home where his mom is. Okay, and now that's the end of that chapter. Make sure you've got a good summary. Make sure that you talk about the actions of 3 people, and there are 3. It'd be really good to name the ones you can name. So of the people on the boat, one of them is Israel Hands. He's a cozen, looks like coxswain. And if you write that out, then you'll remember him for later because he is important. He has been important. He used to be Flint's gunner, the guy that ran the cannons on Captain Flint's ship, and that's important. And the other one, we don't know his name, but he keeps coming up, and we know that he has a red cap on. So maybe man in the red cap would be okay. And of course, Jim. And write down what they did. Make sure there are tons of vocabulary in here that are hard. Some of it because it's ship terms, ocean tide terms, things like that. Please write it down. Take a moment to become familiar and expand your vocabulary. Write about what you wonder. Write about what you like. Write about what you found difficult. If you didn't find something difficult, well, I hope it's because I was helping you. But this is a hard book, and it's not meant to be easy. And finding things difficult is appropriate when we're reading this book. Saying nothing was hard, it's kind of hard to believe that. I'm an English teacher, and I struggle sometimes with this story and some of the words or the way they're used or the terms. Okay, so it isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be challenging. Find the challenges and engage with them. Take them on. Don't just deny that they exist. Okay, it's good to have challenges. All right, we're going to see you the next time. Bye for now.